at before we go off in some direction, which we may have to shift once we get that information. So I think before I want to start tasking the chiefs to be moving on any particular one suggestion, I want to look at the whole operation, including that.
You know, Al, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's part of the recommendation that came out of the first analysis that he presented this evening. The additional information he's looking for the chief to present to Mr. Valley-Fonis.
Actually, I believe that was a different
I thought that was a different task.
It is. It's another idea that we.
Right. So why wouldn't it be incorporated?
For this one, that one's the next one on the list.
Okay.
So, and are you waiting on information from the chief at this
Well,
point?
we'd like to see where this goes, and then we're gonna try to bring the influence, privatizing that into the whole equation. But we wanted to get down the road.
But it ties into the information we need on the ALS.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
Right,
mean,
we need that information in order to complete
I
that
don't want to
analysis.
task them with, and again, I'm not saying this is good, bad, or indifferent, and we shouldn't be looking at it, but I think if we're going to be looking at it, we should be looking at it in totality here, and tasking them with that.
I agree with you. But
Okay.
it's been helpful. You just stood up and just told us what you want, and it sets some deadlines. It sets some deadlines on the chief, sets some deadlines on us. When you want it, that's what happens. We just tend to want the information, and we just kind of kick the can down the road and we never get the closure. This is really where you want it to go, then I'm all for it. Let's set some deadlines. I'd like to see the board of selectmen step up and say, this is where we'd like you to go back. Take that idea, work with the chief, but expand off, go in this direction. And let's set a deadline toward the end of the year or middle of next year. We just can't keep talking about this thing without putting some responsibility on the chief. Okay?
That's fine, okay, and I'm not disagreeing with you, it's just, I don't want to start, again, tasking the chief with looking at something when there's a big void here. You know, so if that's, I mean, and again, I'm just reacting to what was presented this evening. So to me, I'm all in favor of it, and I'm in favor of setting some deadlines, but, you know, I'd like some, you know, the cost analysis to be done in relation to where the overtime is being spent, what the actual effects of, you know, the ambulance runs as opposed to the training, as opposed to the, you know, covering of vacation holidays and all the rest. We need that analysis in order to look at it. And again, what the revenue stream does it generate in relation to the ambulance and the cost of operating it, and again, what are we trying to effectuate in relation to in, to out, safety of the firefighters, and how can we bring it all together? You tell me, Chief, what would it take to do that analysis? My guess is you have a lot of it done anyway.
The packet that I gave him, told him how many ambulance calls we do, how many BLS, how many ALS, there was a packet in there that said how much action ambulance service was gonna charge us. Every one of you got a packet.
That was last budget season.
3 months ago. I gave Sean his driving.
On that issue,
I got a package. I'm not sure it answers all of the questions.
I don't think it answers the
Right.
questions. I mean, I recall getting in, I recall looking at it, and it's a lot of what we've got before, but it doesn't pull it together for us to do a real analysis of, can we be doing something differently, or can we not? You know, or should we not?
but you had asked me for one thing, now you're asking for something else.
Who they?
You folks asked me for what the information I had on the ALS, BLS, Action Ambulance Service, and that's what I put together for you. So now you're tasking with a different task, I put that together for you, no problem with that. But the way we run it right now, we get two services for the same price of one. We get the ambulance and we get the fire, they're cross-trained. We don't use anybody different other than the personnel that we have today.
No, I understand that, but we're short on help. We have a higher overtime budget than most everybody, and part of the reason is because of the staffing levels.
Kept the staffing down.
So if we can't staff up, then when you shift some of the responsibilities, if we're talking about moving the dispatch over, shift some of the responsibilities somewhere else, whether it be ambulance, and, I mean, that's the only thing we do. You're not gonna do your inspectional services necessarily, you're not gonna farm that stuff out, but, you know, what's the cost benefit? And again, we see other communities with private ambulance services, some of them paying a fee as much as $150,000 a year, some of them getting it for nothing, getting ambulance service for nothing, you know, just for the right to come in and do business. So that's something we should be looking at in order to, again, reduce the overtime, maintain the fire and inspectional services coverages that we need, and protect the public. And again, what's the trade-offs? I mean, we just need to know what the trade-offs are too. So sometimes I'm willing to spend more in order to get better, you know, but, again, we have to look at everything if we're going to be, I'd rather move to that direction than lose other people in other departments in the
That's
town.
one of the benefits that we accomplished by changing to the ambulance policy of paying overtime to bring people back. We took it out of automatically calling back everybody for everything. We changed that policy. We made you pay for what you get, and personnel would be paid for the work that they perform,
Right.
instead of calling back everybody every time.
I'm not disagreeing that there have been efficiencies achieved over the years, absolutely. The department has done a far better job in recent years of being more efficient in the operations with the current operation that we have. But can we continue to operate that way? And again, I don't need to get a debate over it. I just want to say, if we're going to look at our overtime budget, if we're going to look at how we're managing our people and managing our department, I want to see the whole, that has to be pulled into it before you get tasked with something from the board. At least that's my opinion. We should be looking at the whole picture.
Okay.
And I agree with, Mike, let's set some sort of
Did
deadlines.
that clarify?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it's real helpful if we can work together on
Yeah.
this, but we don't have a lot of data. We can't task of the chief every day, all day. I think a lot of the direction has to come from the board, and you've got to set the priorities, what you want to obtain. We have a crisis on our hands, that's what I'm being told. And as a fact, we're trying to just come up with some ideas to throw out there, that we can start to go down, explore a little bit more, to ultimately have a cost savings, and we're not laying off anybody. We continue with the great services that the fire department provides, and the police department, the DPW, and so on. And I'm getting somewhat frustrated because we presented an idea to have a discussion tonight, but we actually spent more time talking about why it's such a bad idea. Okay, I didn't say it was a great idea, but I would sure like to have some discussion by the educated people that we pay salary to, that lead the troops in these departments, to help us make that idea work, and try to ultimately come up with some savings, because I don't wanna see anybody get laid off, or somebody lose their job, obviously, and that's so I don't like the situation we're in. I hate it. I live in this town, just like you all. But boy, if we don't change the way we get up at that podium and start to address these things, as we're actually gonna work together to fix them, and not just attack ideas, then you're wasting my time, and you're wasting my committee members' time. I can't say this enough, we don't have all the answers. We're just a bunch of volunteers, trying to put some stuff on the table and get guidance from you, as the executives of this town. I can't ask for it over and over. We got help. You gotta give us direction. You have to be clear on what you want us to do and what you want us to achieve. And please set deadlines, because guess what? We're gonna be at April town meeting before we know it. We're gonna have a crisis on our hands, and we're all gonna be going through it. And the next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna be asking Great Valley Corners to close the lights and emptying the barrels here because we can't afford cans anymore. That's not a good solution.
If I could, Mr. Chair. I think I have to make a comment to that, Mr. Briscoe. I don't, I know what FAC was formed for and to look into, et cetera, but I get the feeling that you think everyone's gonna get up at that podium and agree with you, and that's not gonna happen. If you think that's gonna happen, you should resign right now, because you're gonna get department heads, you're gonna get union, you're gonna get employees who are not gonna agree with you. You're gonna get members of the Board of Selectmen who are gonna agree and disagree. We are in a crisis, but if you think everyone is gonna embrace the projects, it's totally, that's not gonna happen, sir. That's not gonna happen. And
I think he's on the mark, though, as far as getting us to give them a direction, or give the department heads a direction, to get some answers to the questions that need to be answered
Oh, I have
in
no
relation to
problem with
doing
that at
something
all.
differently.
But it seems
And
that-
we haven't gotten to that stage yet.
No,
Yeah.
look,
I have got
tonight, they made a presentation, they've raised some interesting thoughts. There's been some issues raised associated with those thoughts. But I think Mike is right when he asks for, what else do we need? And I think Steve has made the point, and it's something that has come up, and that is that we'd like to take a look at what happens if we outsource the ambulance service? You know, what, does that buy us anything? It may not buy us anything, but you can't determine that without, A, looking at the numbers, right? Which means the number of service calls that were made, the total amount of revenue generated from those calls, and then look at the capital cost and amortization, you know, because we buy an ambulance every so many years, and the amount of money that went into the salary pool from the ambulance account. As you recall, we raised the rates last year, right, to fund some of our operating costs. Now, if it turns out that it can be outsourced, right, and won't cost us anything to outsource it, right, then what do we have? We've got 2 extra firefighters in-house. We've reduced the overtime because we're not covering, but when the ambulance is out and has to make a run somewhere, right, we don't have to bring in a couple of other firefighters. We've actually made a gain. Now, I don't know whether that's, the numbers will tell the story. You know, it's not a matter of saying, gee, I think that's a good idea, or not. It's a matter of looking at it from a financial point of view and looking at the impact of what that means. Does outsourcing an ambulance mean that the service is going to be so diminished that we put our citizens in jeopardy? Well, then that's not a good idea, even if there's a cost savings. But if we're going to do the job right, we've got to get all that information together. So I think it's fair to ask for that, ask the chief
Oh, I
for
do
that
too.
information.
I have no problem asking for the
Right.
information.
But, you know, I don't look at this as a review with everybody coming back, you know, shooting down all these ideas. I think there's a lot of things on the table here that certainly are worth looking at further and getting all of the information so we can make a reasonable decision. And Steve's right on target here on that. Right? And I think it's fair to ask our department heads to provide the information that you need. Now, when I conceptualized the idea and brought forth the FAC to the board, right, it was the idea of the liaison and why we said we'd have a liaison from each of the boards, right, to be the conduit to get questions answered and to communicate with schools, with general government. So it was at least it was my thought at the time that the liaison's responsibility was that of, if you need some information, right, the liaison, being a board member, would, you know, expedite getting that information to you. And similarly, if there was some feedback that the liaison needed to bring as a result of something that you were pursuing, saying, hey, you know, don't even go down that street because it doesn't make sense, right? You would get that feedback. Now, if that isn't working 100%, then we've got to fix it. But I think that you've brought forth this evening some ideas, and it's apparent that we need some additional information to make an overall decision of where we might go with this.
We're not looking for an acceptance tonight?
No, I said, we're going to take all this under advisement, Mike.
But from a
Right.
budgetary standpoint, we're limited from the time frame as to what types of changes we can effectuate quickly enough to
Right.
realize some savings. Now, is civilian dispatch a reasonable expectation to factor into our budget deliberations in the next month? I don't know. You know, is analysis on the ambulance service something we can factor into the next month? I would say yes. You know, so if that's the case from an immediate standpoint, that's what we look at first. We should be looking at long range, as we talked about earlier between the two chiefs. You know, really, where are we going to see ourselves 10 years from now? Where do we need to be, and how do we
Right.
position
That-
ourselves?
No
for
matter
it?
what, that wouldn't
But-
happen overnight.
No, so that needs to be in the back of our minds anyway. So, you know, we need to task them with something which is achievable, that's going to effectuate, bring about some reasonable change if need be, you know, in the upcoming fiscal year. I think we're very limited as to time-wise what we can do
On this particular subject.
on this particular subject, right?
Okay, Rita?